Hey guys, tonight we're jumping straight back to one of history's strangest and most forgotten customs, Halloween evening in Victorian England. Picture a world where your outfit is like 40% ash, 30% wool and 100% scratchy. And honestly, the biggest danger on Halloween isn't some spooky attraction. It's your relative Thomas hurling a spoiled turnip at your head. This is the time of questionable apples, aggressive cabbage night destruction, and more unexpected fire risks than you'll see at your uncle's Independence Day cookout. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate what I create here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what hour it is for you. Now, I need you to lower the lights, turn on a fan for that gentle white noise, set aside your phone unless you're using it to hear this, and perhaps pull your toes in so they don't get chomped by imaginary chimney sweeps. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever thought about what Halloween was like before miniature Snickers and synthetic costumes? Did children bob for apples or just for a shot at not eating boiled cabbage for supper? Did they go house to house demanding candy? Or was it more of a give us a potato or we redecorate your cow type of arrangement? Could you make it through a night with only a lantern, a potato sack, and a profoundly superstitious grandmother warning you that ghosts can detect fear and dirty socks? Would you survive 5 minutes attempting to trick or treat in a world where trick often meant genuine property destruction, and treat might be an apple with the worms still living inside? And now, congratulations, you've just awakened in Victorian England. It's October 31st, 1876. The atmosphere smells like coal smoke and cold cabbage. Your shoes are 2 sizes too tight, and you're about to live through the spookiest, strangest, and pettiest Halloween of your new existence. Good luck. You open your eyes to a bedroom that's 1 part drafty, 1 part smog. It's Halloween morning and you're already breathing in enough coal dust to flavour a stew. The atmosphere is sharp, your breath visible, and someone's yelling about missing socks. Welcome to another day of Victorian life where spooky begins with a cold bed and an even colder breakfast. The first feeling of the day isn't enthusiasm for Halloween, but a desperate hope that the window would shut itself or that central heating existed. No such luck. Your breath swirls above you in little white clouds, a daily reminder that your bed is located somewhere between the North Pole and the train station. You reach for your blanket, which has the insulating capacity of wet cardboard, and try to force yourself upright. The sheets are coarse, the mattress lumpy, and you're convinced the lumps are shifting. Possibly another infestation, possibly just your imagination. In Victorian England, it's sometimes difficult to tell. There's no soft alarm clock, just the sound of your youngest sibling screaming from the next room that someone's stolen his only pair of serviceable socks. This is immediately followed by your mother's voice ringing up the stairs, equal parts loving and threatening, calling all children, pets, and possibly minor ghosts to breakfast on Halloween. Every shadow in the corridor is suspicious, but most of them are just relatives stumbling to the wash basin. You sit up, trembling, and swing your feet onto the frozen floorboards. There's no carpet unless you count the mysterious dust ruffle that used to be a family dog's blanket. Every step is a jolt to the system, and you wonder whether frostbite or missing breakfast is the greater threat. In a Victorian household, breakfast waits for no one, and the decent chairs go fast. You shuffle toward the kitchen, trailing coal dust and resentment, feeling like the world's youngest, least glamorous chimney sweep. As you pass the cracked window, you get your first glimpse at Halloween. Outside, the fog hangs low, thick as pudding, and every distant figure looks like a potential ghost, or worse, a neighbour. The streets shine with last night's drizzle, and someone's already chalked a crude pumpkin face on the fence. You're not certain if it's a festive prank or just your brother's artistic protest against vegetables. Downstairs, breakfast is already happening. The kitchen is warm, but only by comparison to the rest of the house. The fire is a few embers struggling to stay awake in the hearth, and the smell is equal parts boiled bread and coal smoke. Someone's made tea so weak you can see the bottom of the cup and the jam is mostly seeds. You grab your portion, wedge yourself onto the corner of a bench and try not to think about the fact that your socks are damp and your nose is running. It's the perfect beginning to a day of mischief and misery. Halloween enthusiasm mixes uneasily with the usual morning chaos. You wonder if you'll receive an apple tonight or just the traditional handful of soot. Your sister brags that she's going to bob for 3 apples this year, which sounds ambitious for someone who can't swim and has a mild fear of water. Meanwhile, your older brother is already scheming cabbage-based revenge on the neighbours for last year's pranks. There's discussion of ghost stories after supper, but first everyone has to survive school chores and the ongoing mystery of who stole the jam spoon. Answer the cat. You finish your breakfast, if you can call it that, and return upstairs to put on another layer. Because the chill never quite disappears, the day stretches out in front of you. Tricks to plot, costumes to improvise, and a solid chance of getting struck in the head with a turnip before bedtime. But first, you have to navigate the spookiest challenge of all. Washing your face in freezing water and pretending not to mind. Victorian Halloween hasn't even begun, and you're already in survival mode. Because before the ghosts, before the lanterns, and long before the candy, the first obstacle of Halloween in Victorian England is simply making it out of bed alive, mostly dressed, and with at least one dry sock. And if you can manage that, the rest of the night is just a bonus. There's a particular kind of suffering that can only be summoned by the sound of a Victorian breakfast being prepared, mainly because it's the exact same sound you heard at dinner, and possibly at lunch. You shuffle into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and still coughing up a bit of the morning's coal dust, and you're greeted by the scent of boiling. Just boiling. It's impossible to determine if it's bread, eggs, cabbage, or some poor vegetable that's wandered in by mistake. Whatever's in the pot, it's definitely been boiled, and it's definitely not improving with time. The kitchen is a study in organised chaos. Siblings elbow their way to the table like starved wolves. Mother stands by the stove, wielding a wooden spoon like a general overseeing a particularly hopeless battlefield. She's muttering something about someone tracking mud across the clean floor. But you're more concerned with securing a seat that isn't already sticky. The family cat is prowling under the table, searching for an unguarded crust, and someone is already arguing over whose turn it is to sit next to the window. Prime real estate, because it's the farthest spot from the draft. Your father, already dressed for work, sits at the head of the table with the air of a man who has accepted his culinary fate. His breakfast is a slab of dark bread that requires the jaw strength of a blacksmith dipped in tea that's mostly hot water with a suggestion of leaf. He offers you a weak smile and a brief, "Don't let your brother near the butter." That's if there is butter. You're pretty confident there hasn't been real butter since last Christmas, but everyone maintains the pretense. Today's special is boiled egg, singular, divided meticulously among 3 children. There's porridge, greyish and lumpy, shared out in chipped bowls. The sugar bowl contains mostly dreams and a few stubborn grains hiding at the bottom. You watch as your sister stirs hers with the solemnity of a chemist at work, then winces as she discovers a suspicious lump that may once have been a raisin or possibly a pebble. You ask your mother what's in the porridge today, and she answers what isn't, which is both comforting and alarming. There are other items on the table, depending on the day's fortunes and whether the shopkeeper owed your family any favours. Sometimes there's a sliver of bacon gone before you can blink. Sometimes it's kippers, which is just a fancy way of saying fish that smells like regret. More often there's a parade of bread, heels spread with jam so thin it might be homeopathic, or treacle that clings to your teeth like a bad decision. Every meal is punctuated by the sound of cutlery clattering and siblings squabbling over the last potato. There are ongoing negotiations about who will have to finish the leftover cabbage from last night, which, thanks to the magic of boiling, now looks exactly like the cabbage you started with, only more depressed. Conversation revolves around the usual family politics: whose turn it is to sweep the chimney, who forgot to feed the chickens, who's responsible for the suspicious footprint on the ceiling. Through it all, Mother reigns supreme, distributing rations with military precision. She manages to keep the conversation civil, mostly by threatening to withhold pudding at supper, a threat that no child takes lightly, even if pudding sometimes just means a slightly less grey bowl of porridge. Breakfast is equal parts survival and performance art. Your little brother claims to see a ghost in the pantry, which is his excuse for avoiding the cold storage, and also his way of trying to score an extra spoonful of porridge. No one buys it, but everyone pretends to consider it, because Victorian breakfast is about keeping hope alive, no matter how watery the tea or how questionable the sausage. You eat quickly because cold porridge sets like cement, and because the first child finished gets first pick of Halloween night's secret plans. Who gets to carry the turnip lantern, who gets first crack at the apple bobbing, and who's stuck helping Grandad set up for tonight's ghost stories. By the end of breakfast, you're warm enough to brave the icy hallway, full enough to last until lunch, and determined enough to survive whatever Halloween has in store. Even if you have to eat cabbage 3 more times before bed. Let's discuss costumes. You might imagine Halloween as a riot of colour, so sparkle and synthetic fibres, but in Victorian England, your choices are scratchy, scratchier, or a hand-me-down that spent 3 generations being reimagined. This isn't a costume party, it's an endurance test. Your morning has barely begun, but it's time to suit up for a day that's equal parts chilly, itchy, and likely to end with you being mistaken for a chimney sweep, even if you're not one. The first layer is the standard issue long johns, or drawers, if you're lucky. Made from wool or some experimental fabric that's one step removed from being a horse blanket, these undergarments have survived the laundry cycle only occasionally, and there's a distinct possibility they were last boiled with your brother's socks. That's just flavour as far as you're concerned. You wrestle into them, every movement accompanied by the sound of static and the scent of old soap. Next comes the shirt. Often a hand-me-down from an older sibling. It's got patches on the patches and buttons that never quite match. In true Victorian fashion, it's either too tight in the neck or so loose it could double as a tent. You try not to think about what caused that suspicious brown stain near the hem. If you're lucky, someone has let you borrow a waistcoat. This is a rare privilege usually reserved for special occasions, and Halloween, with its potential for public embarrassment, just barely qualifies. Your legs are shoved into stockings or woolen leggings, the sort that make your calves look like boiled sausages, and your ankles itch in a way that no scratching can ever truly cure. Over those knickerbockers or a skirt, depending on your assigned role in the family Halloween hierarchy. The family rule is, if it's clean, you wear it. If it's not, you wear it and claim it's part of your costume. But what about the actual costume? Here, Victorian innovation meets pure desperation. There's no trip to a superstore, no shiny polyester capes. Instead, you dig through the household rag pile for anything that might transform. You want to be a ghost? Grab an old sheet, preferably one without too many holes, and hope your mother doesn't recognise her missing laundry. If you're after something spookier, a dab of soot across the cheeks turns you instantly into a phantom. Or if you smear too much, just a very tired child with poor hygiene. Creativity is both encouraged and mandatory. Your sister ties a scarf around her head and declares herself a gypsy with all the vague historical accuracy of a parlour palm. Your older brother fashions a witch's hat from last week's newspaper, blackened with the same stove polish used on the family boots. If you're really lucky, someone unearths a mask from the back of a cupboard, a lumpy, slightly terrifying thing made of stiffened linen and paint that flakes off at the first sign of moisture breathing in it is optional. Some families get more ambitious. If your parents are feeling festive, you might get a potato sack with eye holes or a homemade cloak stitched from an old curtain. The trick is to look just scary enough to warrant a treat, but not so scary that you spook the chickens on the way out the door. No one wants to spend Halloween explaining to the neighbour why their prized hen is now hiding under the coal bin. Accessories are a mixed bag. A broomstick is always available, though you'll have to wrestle your siblings for the good one, the one with fewer splinters. An old belt becomes a snake, a pot lid becomes a shield, and the family dog, if you can catch it, might serve as a reluctant steed for your impromptu night costume. By the end of the dressing process, you're layered, lumpy, and already regretting every single clothing choice. You're not exactly the embodiment of your chosen character, but you are warm, protected from the October chill, and officially ready to terrify your neighbours, if only by how much lint you can collect in a single outing. As you stare at yourself in the cracked hallway mirror, you realise Halloween in Victorian England isn't about looking good. It's about surviving the night with all your toes and your dignity mostly intact. And with a final tug at your lopsided hat, you head into the day, itchy, bundled, and ready for adventure. The walk to school on Halloween morning in Victorian England is less a commute and more a slow-motion parade of shivers, arguments, and thinly veiled ghost panic. You trudge through the fog-drenched streets bundled in more wool than a sheep in January, one eye on your feet and one on every looming shadow. The city seems to lean in today, houses pressing closer, alleyways darker, and even the stray cats slinking along the gutters look twice as haunted. You're not alone, of course. There's a whole gaggle of children moving in the same direction, trailing siblings, squabbles, and elaborate plans for the evening's mischief. The bravest among you walk in the middle, surrounded by a buffer of smaller kids, and the occasional cart horse no one wants to be, on the edge near the walls, where the ghosts of murdered chimney sweeps and jilted brides are rumoured to lurk. This is the morning when the usual bickering gives way to the real business of Halloween ghost stories. Victorian children take their supernatural lore as seriously as their chores, and everyone's got a favourite tale. As you shuffle down the lane, someone always starts with the classic The Headless Lady of Pennywell Lane, who appears if you say her name 3 times, but nobody ever speaks it aloud. A wave of shivers moves through the crowd. The school building is just old brick with floors that groan, as if confessing secrets from years past. The mist trails you indoors, wrapping around your shoes. Teachers, dreary as the sky, pretend not to care, yet even they watch the shadows more closely. Today carries an unspoken understanding. On Halloween, even the toughest schoolmistress catches herself looking back before that first bell rings. The true education is about making it through. Who can share the most terrifying tale without batting an eye? Who dares pass the coat room by themselves? And who's got the nerve to visit the basement bathroom, especially after rumours spread about seeing the spirit of old Mr. Pettigrew, the previous headmaster, still roaming the halls with his wooden walking stick? Girls huddle by the glass panes, trading stories of possessed dolls and ghostly steps in the attic. Boys naturally raise the stakes, bragging about run-ins with the infamous black dog, a phantom beast that shows itself to kids who lie to their mamas, which turns out to be every single one of them by a show of hands. You're listening, pulse racing, uncertain if you're frightened or simply freezing. The tales are a blend of moral warnings, barely disguised cautions, and total fabrications. One kid insists her relative witnessed a spectre at the bakery, just his own mirror image, but it still qualifies. Another describes strange glowing lights at the burial ground, and you quietly promise yourself to never cut through there again, even if it shaves off 5 minutes and helps you dodge Mrs. Cratchit's aggressive goose. Classroom instruction on Halloween is pointless. Math transforms into ghost mathematics. How many phantoms are needed to haunt a wine cellar? And geography suddenly focuses on charting which narrow streets are most likely to contain wailing spirits. The instructor's efforts to maintain control are barely genuine. She recalls her own childhood, whispering tales beneath desks and jumping at every draft. During recess, you and your crew gather in the muddy yard where the activities take on a decidedly paranormal quality. Somebody challenges you to tap the hexed tree stump near the barrier, and you do, making sure your cuff doesn't graze the questionable green growth. Another kid launches a competition to see who can deliver the best phantom performance. It appears everyone just mimics their dad with a nasty cold. When the school day wraps up, you're jumpy and worn out. Every normal sound, a door banging, a pane shaking, seems like it could be something from beyond. The stories spin in your mind, mixing with the scent of chalk dust and boiled vegetables. It sets the stage perfectly for an evening of pranks, sweets, and slight psychological damage. But really it's just another Halloween in Victorian England, where even the doubters peek under the mattress to be safe. Abandon everything you think you know about purchased disguises. In Victorian England, Halloween dress-up isn't a quick shop visit, but rather a fierce scavenger hunt through the household's most dubious fabric collection. If you're aiming to become something anything on Halloween evening, you need to master improvisation, stitching and bargaining, all while dodging your brothers and sisters and surviving your mama's endless lectures about being wasteful. For most Victorian youngsters, the costume chest is really just a mislabeled wooden container that also serves as seating, a step stool, and when times get rough, a sanctuary from household tasks. Inside sits a jumble of forgotten items, threadbare shawls, lace scraps, worn-out hats, and precisely one velvet glove eternally separated from its mate. You extract a piece of dark fabric, check it for dubious marks, and pronounce it adequate for your vampire/cat burglar get-up. If you locate an aged bonnet or cylinder hat, you're practically nobility for the night. Face coverings are a different challenge entirely. There's no cheerful display of manufactured faces. What you get instead is a somewhat alarming piece of hardened cloth or cardboard coated with whatever ink remains in the household supply. Drawing breath through these handmade contraptions requires faith and strong jaw muscles. You secure it with an old bootlace, peer through the cut-out openings, and try not to dwell on how many relatives' noses have previously inhabited this same covering. If you're feeling daring, or if you've got an especially imaginative elder sister, disguises reach elevated levels of creativity. Maybe a pale bed covering transforms into a spectre, unless it's washing day, which means the ghost has odd stripes and carries a faint odour of yesterday's dinner. One year somebody attempted creating bat appendages from a damaged parasol. It resembled less a nocturnal creature and more a kid escaping an especially hostile clothes line. But credit where credit's due. Soot serves as the preferred enhancement for genuine Halloween devotees. Just dunk your fingers in the fireplace, smear a bit on your face, and you're immediately changed into anything from an undead creature to a child who tumbled down the coal shaft, frequently impossible to tell apart in the end result. The fortunate ones receive a touch of crimson from what's left of last Christmas's decoration ribbon. Everyone else simply borrows Mama's worn wrap and crosses their fingers. Then there's the sibling competition. Disguises are loaned, traded, and sometimes swiped. Before nightfall, a cape you constructed from an aged drape suddenly vanishes, only to show up on your brother, who claims he discovered it through legitimate means. One resourceful kid might craft a tiara from a burlap bag, a damaged strand of beads, and the household's backup tinfoil supply, all while defending against charges of rule-breaking from envious siblings. Costume negotiations are brutal, and disputes frequently conclude with a peace agreement sealed over charred breakfast bread. Functionality matters most. Disguises need warmth for outdoor exploits, but can't be so bulky you're unable to flee from a grumpy neighbour. Or more, probably, from your own mama if you've taken her decent pinafore. The smartest kids pack additional clothing beneath their ghostly wrapping, converting the traditional sheet spectre appearance into a kind of Victorian insulated jacket. Sure, you waddle rather than sprint, but you're comfortable, and fashion credits mean nothing when the temperature sits just 3 degrees above frozen. Eventually, everyone queues up for review in the sitting room, a ragtag parade of makeshift monsters, ash-covered witches, miniature vampires, and 1 or 2 puzzle costumes created on impulse. The grown-ups exhale heavily, the cat bolts, and somewhere the household hound eyes the improvised werewolf covering with reasonable fear. Nobody can determine exactly what anyone's meant to represent, but there's agreement you're Halloween ready. Victorian Halloween disguises might not earn prizes for accuracy or ease, but they're constructed to last through the evening, the tricks and the November freeze. Because in this time period, the most frightening thing isn't the supernatural tales, it's explaining to your mama why her sole tablecloth now features arm openings. Nothing unites Victorian youngsters quite like the anticipation of apple bobbing, an activity so brimming with hope, disorder, and questionable cleanliness that it's remarkable anyone made it to grown-up years. As evening arrives and the initial wave of tricks have been completed, somebody's footwear concealed, a cabbage hurled at the garden entrance, neighbourhood kids shuffle into a sitting room or storage shed, breath visible in the frigid air, excitement mounting for the night's featured attraction. The arrangement seems innocent enough. A big wooden tub, dented and somewhat twisted, gets hauled to the room's middle. Several apples, all having experienced better times, are dropped in, some so damaged they nearly float from pity. The liquid, pulled from the frigid faucet or water source, is cold enough to make your jaw ache just from sight. If fortune favours you, the liquid is reasonably pure, but typically it possesses a slight puzzling tint that resists explanation and probably shouldn't be investigated. This is Victorian England, remember. If nothing's swimming in it, it's likely acceptable. The guidelines are straightforward and widely disregarded. You clasp your arms behind you, crouch, or get forcefully nudged to the container's edge and try catching an apple using solely your mouth. The bigger kids encircle you, mocking and encouraging each other. It's the greatest entertainment you can experience, with fruit and a questionable resistance to illness. Your nostrils go instantly frozen, your face turns bright scarlet, and your locks get soaked enough to drip down your neck, introducing a damp chill to your catalogue of miseries. There's invariably at least one over-enthusiastic participant who pursues the apple with a hungry dog's determination. They dive face forward, liquid splashing beyond the edges, surfacing victoriously with an apple gripped in their teeth, and 3/4 of the neighbourhood's bacteria. Everyone applauds, partially from respect, partially from gratitude that it wasn't their opportunity. Then, your personal try is less glorious. Following multiple humiliating attempts and a near-drowning incident, you succeed in trapping an apple against the base with your nose. You surface dripping and victorious, gripping a bruised apple tasting vaguely of youth and somewhat like cleaning solution. As the queue moves forward, the liquid grows cloudier and the apples more beaten. The smallest kids mainly wind up drenched, eyes huge and streaming, with only fuzzy recollections of what apples genuinely taste like. There's consistently one youngster who claims the floating apple blinked at them, and the bigger kids instantly transform this into fresh ghost material for coming Halloweens. Fear the apple of destruction. Last witnessed by the kid, who's currently got sniffles. Grown-ups observe equally entertained and horrified, sometimes reminding the youngsters not to gulp any liquid unless you want 2 weeks away from school. Cleanliness, what exists of it, gets abandoned for tradition's sake. The household feline shows up, investigates the container and sensibly runs away. Somebody's mama grumbles about squandering decent apples, though the apples themselves would likely dispute being labelled decent. As the final player takes their soggy, trembling chance, the tub finally gets emptied, ideally in the yard, where it promptly creates a brand new habitat. The activity concludes with everyone patting their faces, using the shared household towel, which has become damper and somehow grimier than previously. If luck's on your side, you'll discover a dry section. If not, you simply add somewhat moist to the collection of words describing your Halloween outfit. Despite risking catching a chill, or maybe precisely because of it, apple bobbing remains a peak moment. There's an elemental excitement to plunging your skull into frigid liquid for a taste of success and whatever additional matter might be floating there. For a fleeting instant, the giggles overwhelm the screaming wind, and the recollection of cold morning meals and scratchy disguises disappears. This is Halloween Victorian fashion, unhygienic, unrefined, and impossible to forget. And as you wipe liquid from your vision and chomp into your earned apple, you experience, just for an instant, genuinely alive. Or at minimum, as alive as someone can feel following swallowing half a cup of communal Victorian washing liquid. Before pumpkins transformed into the social media stars of Halloween, the undeniable ruler of eerie decoration in Victorian England was the modest turnip. Correct, if you desired making a lantern, you didn't grab a pleasant orange squash. You seized the closest gnarled, somewhat muddy root crop and braced yourself for an hour of hazardous, slick carving. Abandon thoughts of pleasant pumpkin fields. This is an ordeal of blisters, smashed thumbs, and the persistent odour of crushed roots. It starts with a journey to the kitchen plot, or, for town residents, a quick rummage through the vegetable storage. The ideal turnips for lanterns are the ones nobody desires eating, lumpy, enormous, and as solid as Victorian arithmetic assignments. With several rusty kitchen blades and one wildly hopeful spoon, you and your siblings stake your claims and begin chopping away. Everyone claims they possess a hidden method, which typically involves simply assaulting the thing with wild abandon until either the turnip surrenders or your determination does. The initial obstacle is extracting the crown, no simple feat when your blade is as dull as yesterday's loaf. Then you hollow out the centre, learning that raw turnip possesses roughly identical texture and scent as a cold soak. Following physical education, the workspace fills with colourless scrapings, stray seeds, and the variety of vegetable slime that even the household canine refuses to approach. Your mama groans audibly at the chaos, but remains silent. She understands better than to stand between a youngster and their spooky goals. Cutting the expression is where genuine artistry, or at minimum comedy, appears. Victorian turnip lanterns aren't celebrated for their attractiveness. Some emerge genuinely frightening, ragged mouths, pointed eyes, and an overall look of philosophical despair that flawlessly mirrors your own when you recall the condition of your arithmetic work. Others resemble potatoes following a rough evening. Nevertheless, everyone gasps and admires, acting like each creation is brilliant while privately ranking the most hideous for later manipulation material. Once your lantern's finished, indicating you've gone numb in both hands, it's candle time. You jam the remains of a tallow candle or a wax chunk into the carved interior, fighting to maintain it vertical. Victorian candles are notorious for burning with all the reliability of an irritated rodent. One instant your lantern beams with Halloween glory, the following it's belching smoke and endangering to ignite the household linen. If fortune smiles, you'll survive the evening without burning anything. But nobody guarantees anything. At last, you stick some twine or a twig through the crown to transport your lantern around. The lanterns get marched outdoors, lifted high as evidence of bravery and confirmation of your readiness to risk infection for an evening of moderate fear. They throw bizarre, dancing shadows across barriers and fences, and if fortune smiles, frighten at minimum one neighbour's unsuspecting feline into establishing residence in the adjacent village. No two turnip lanterns match, and some entertainment comes from contrasting whose vegetable turned out most gruesome, or whose candle survived past sleep time. There's invariably one relative who insists their lantern is possessed, insisting it blinked at them from the other side of the space. You figure they simply poked an additional opening, but you participate because that's half the entertainment. The lantern march down the path is worth witnessing. A shaky line of youngsters, each gripping a snarling, sunken-eyed vegetable that appears to be scheming payback for being selected last. In the yard, the radiance of countless tiny dancing lights pierces through the autumn haze, throwing faces into peculiar contrast and transforming every shadow into the start of fresh ghost material. And as you walk, giggling and shaking through the lanes or beside the hedges, you discover that occasionally the plainest traditions Particularly the ones that leave your palms aching and your dwelling smelling like broth are the ones that render Halloween genuinely memorable, even if tomorrow you discover a gnawed turnip at the entrance and swear you hear it murmur your name. As dusk creeps over the housetops and initial stars wake up, Victorian youngsters everywhere start vibrating with scarcely controlled disorder. This isn't merely Halloween evening, this is chaos night. A blessed evening when every dwelling transforms into a war zone, every barrier a mark and every grown-up a possible opponent. In a realm without television, social media, or even dependable indoor facilities, trick-based havoc is childhood entertainment in its purest form. Readying for Chaos Night begins weeks beforehand. The shrewdest youngsters and the ones with minimal oversight invest hours scheming. They exchange hushed tactics behind bushes and trade formulas for handmade irritation powder. Hint? It's merely sawdust, but nobody inform the younger ones. Even the least creative youngster can help, typically by serving as lookout or diverting Mrs. Butterworth as her vegetable patch mysteriously diminishes. When the timepiece strikes dusk, you collect your materials. This is a basic operation. A chunk of soap for glass marking, a pocket filled with cord for connecting doorknobs together, and an ancient damaged turnip for throwing at your least preferred neighbour's entrance. Soot and powder are traditional choices, but the genuinely daring might try the infamous inverted pail of liquid at the doorstep. A technique that will enter household legend if successful and local notoriety if not. The initial marks are invariably the most apparent. Your own dwelling. It's an implicit regulation. You trick your relatives before anyone else gets opportunity. Your elder brother secures the sitting room entrance and claims he spotted a rodent while your younger sister substitutes the sugar with sodium and sits quietly anticipating someone to destroy their beverage. The genuine achievement, though, is surprising a parent without warning. Nothing compares to the noise of your papa, typically dignified, yelping as his footwear squelches with concealed cabbage. Beyond the walls, the genuine activities commence. Groups of youngsters wander the stone streets, vision glowing in the lantern glow, palms filled with mud spheres and spirits filled with mischief. Barriers are shaken, knockers pounded, and more than one firewood stack discovers itself reorganised in the form of a fairly provocative squash. You're cautious to bypass the dwellings where the adults are cruel or worse, the ones who genuinely relish participating and doubling your workload by tricking you directly back. The most courageous among you attempt the supreme trick, exchanging the neighbour's washing. There exists no superior demonstration of talent and courage than displaying Mr. Tompkins' gigantic undergarments in Mrs. Green's plot. It's a revolutionary deed, a social statement, and a certain conversation topic. Through Christmas, naturally, the danger is enormous. Get spotted and you'll be cleaning floors through next Halloween. But oh, the fame. Chaos Night possesses its implicit regulations. Never cause lasting harm, never trick the minister unless you're remarkably swift. And if somebody weeps, the activity concludes. Unless it's your sibling in that situation, grow tougher. Most tricks are innocent. Trading markers, switching footwear, or attaching notes declaring "kick me" to unsuspecting backs. A select handful are genius in their plainness, like sneaking an amphibian into the washing container, or positioning a false spider on the bread surface. Naturally, there are mishaps. The pail overturns on your personal footwear, the doorbell cord breaks and strikes you in the expression, and occasionally you're captured mid-throw, encountering the harsh gaze of Mrs. Peabody, who will definitely inform your mama. But that's the excitement of Chaos Night. The boundary between fame and washing tasks is razor sharp. By the moment the chapel bell rings for dinner, your palms are filthy, your garments are muddier, and your spirit is brighter. You reassemble with your crew to contrast prizes, half a turnip, a fastener, and 3 puzzling stones. Exchange tales of victory and catastrophe, and attempt not to appear too satisfied as your parents attempt to and fail to determine who substituted the household feline's necklace with a thread of boiled confections. Ultimately, Chaos Night concerns less the tricks and more the recollections. The giggles resonating down the passages, the excitement of a flawlessly accomplished soap illustration, and the awareness that, exclusively for tonight, you escaped with a portion of innocent disorder. Victorian youth at its complete finest. If you believed tricks peaked with soap on glass panes and cords across entryways, you've never observed the magnificence of Cabbage Evening, a Victorian Halloween custom that combines vandalism, blends in some dubious produce, and permits disorder to bubble all evening long. This is the championship of vegetable combat. If you're fortunate enough to wake on November 1st, without cabbage atop your housetop, you either created strong allies, or you were the one throwing them. The essence of Cabbage Evening is plain. Locate a vegetable that smells questionable, is somewhat squishy, and has already failed its attempt. For the household stew container, cabbage is the ammunition of preference. Substantial enough to cause harm, manageable enough to hurl over a barrier, and in its autumn magnificence, remarkably pungent. Other contenders make sporadic appearances, the sporadic turnip, a wilted carrot, or a potato so aged it could qualify for retirement benefits. But nothing declares Halloween like an airborne cabbage skull. Readying commences at dusk, as youngsters rush to concealed vegetable stockpiles. Behind every hedge and beneath every entry lurks a hidden arsenal of dismissed garden harvest. You examine your cabbage collection like a commander readying for conflict, choosing only the supreme specimens for your operation. There's invariably one youngster who transports an absolute behemoth, a cabbage so tremendous and aromatic that transporting it is a deed of bravery, or, at minimum, terrible choice. The initial attack is invariably the loudest. One instant, everything is peaceful in the chilly evening. The following, a thundering thud resonates through the area as the initial cabbage strikes an entrance. A barrier, or, on an especially ambitious throw, the local merchant's wagon. Youngsters shriek with delight, grown-ups moan, and canines lose their shared sanity. For a short, enchanted period, the entire lane is active with airborne greens. But there's additional to Cabbage Evening than raw disorder. The genuine craft lies in the approach. Should you target the housetop, assured noise, postponed clean-up, the entrance mat, maximum squash, elevated danger of parental revenge, or the window ledge. Uncommon, sophisticated, frequently punished by an irritated mama. Some squads create partnerships. One youngster diverts the adults, another positions the throw, and a third maintains watch for the local officer, who is never entertained and invariably 2 paces behind. The destruction builds rapidly. By midnight, entrances are smeared with cabbage liquid, plots are scattered with stalks, and the atmosphere is dense with the scent of justified mischief. The genuinely famous pranksters target the wind indicator or the coal shed crown. Positioning a cabbage, there is neighbourhood law material. The variety of tale you'll repeat every Halloween until you're aged enough to be irritated by it yourself. Naturally, things go awry. Occasionally a cabbage separates early, showering everyone within 6 feet in smelly fragments. Sometimes a misfire eliminates someone's meticulously carved turnip lantern, igniting a vegetable-centered conflict that continues through Christmas. And pity the youngster who can't throw accurately. There's invariably one who positions a cabbage directly on the local constable's cap, instantly regretting every existence decision leading to that instant. As the evening concludes, households appear with lanterns and sweepers, examining the conflict zone. Some raise their fists, others chuckle, and several simply exhale and add cabbage broth to tomorrow's schedule. But nobody is genuinely furious. Cabbage Evening is a coming-of-age ritual, an opportunity for youngsters to release pressure, for parents to recall their own misspent youth, and for the complete community to connect over the plain pleasure of throwing something somewhat rotten at another person's dwelling. And so, as you march home, with cabbage marks on your palms and a heroic story on your tongue, You recognize you've performed your role in a grand, absurd custom. In the realm of Victorian Halloween, you lack sweets, but you possess recollections. Chaotic, aromatic, and completely memorable. If apple bobbing is the unofficial washing of Victorian Halloween, then apple catching is its competitive event, an activity that examines not solely your timing, but your readiness to endanger your teeth in the chase of temporary fame. Abandoned dentist visits and contemporary orthodontics. This is the Victorian period where the sole dental strategy is don't tumble face forward into the fireplace. And apple catching is here to remind you that every chomp is a wager. The activity is misleadingly plain, as all the superior forms of mischief usually are. Somewhere in the sitting room or outside in the storage shed, a grown-up with questionable wisdom secures a length of cord across the space or from support to support. Apples, fresh if fortune favours you and distinctly aged if not, are fastened at intervals. The objective: palms behind your spine, you thrust, bite and attempt grabbing an apple with solely your mouth. No palms permitted, no rule breaking, and definitely no griping if you consume more cord than fruit. The apples themselves are the performance stars, and not in a complimentary manner. Some are tiny and stone solid, others soft and damaged. Several may have experienced one Halloween excessively many rolling around the pantry base. Nevertheless, nothing will discourage a Victorian youngster pursuing a reward, particularly one that doesn't taste of cabbage. There's a whisper of expectation as the initial volunteer advances, neck extended, mouth agape, arms thrashing like a penguin on wheeled footwear. The audience applauds or mocks depending on household custom. It rapidly becomes clear that apple catching is more difficult than it appears. The apples swing with every thrust, avoiding your teeth, striking your nostrils or rotating just beyond grasp as your relatives chuckle themselves senseless. The apples are slippery, the cord is slick, and half the entertainment is observing your siblings emerge with crimson faces and somewhat damaged pride. The fortunate handful succeed in clamping onto an apple, gaining applause, boasting privileges, and likely a splinter or two. Meanwhile, there are invariably casualties. Somebody grows overzealous and winds up with an expression filled with cord, or worse, succeeds in receiving an apple to the forehead. Sometimes a loose tooth gets claimed by the activity, later exhibited with pride and some tissue. More than one youngster spends the evening complaining about painful gums but privately wishing for another attempt. Victorian dental work is primarily homegrown regardless. If you're lacking a tooth, you simply whistle louder. Throughout ghost tales, the disorder doesn't conclude with apples. Variations exist everywhere. Sometimes the activity leader, typically a troublesome uncle or an elder sibling with appreciation of slapstick, substitutes in a potato for additional challenge. A parsnip makes an entrance, generating shrieks and a fresh round of wild, tooth-risking efforts. In some dwellings, an uncommon coin is secured alongside the apples, converting the activity into a wild blend of Halloween and amateur finance. Simply attempt not to gulp your prizes. Parents hover in the distance, alternately flinching and encouraging everyone forward, sometimes cautioning about damaged teeth but recognising that warning stories won't compete against the attraction of sweetness and victory. It's entirely in pleasant entertainment, and at minimum half the grown-ups are previous winners, now somewhat more worried about their personal dental prospects. By the evening's conclusion, everyone's locks are chaotic, expressions sticky, and there's a broad feeling of achievement or at minimum survival. The apples that survive the trial are victoriously separated, distributed, and consumed. For an instant, you forget about scratchy disguises and cabbage-centred combat. You possess a jaw that throbs and a spirit that's bright. In the Victorian realm, where rewards are scarce and obstacles are numerous, apple catching is the most genuine form of satisfaction. A bit of discomfort, abundant giggles and recollections to mull over long following the final cord is removed. If breakfast was a drab march of boiled wretchedness, Halloween dinner in Victorian England attempts vigorously to compensate for it, with varying outcomes. This is the feast youngsters have been fantasizing about all week, powered by tales of rewards and murmurs of confections. In reality, the banquet is a meticulously arranged combination of whatever remains in the pantry, several closely protected delicacies, and an obligatory dusting of coal residue for ambiance. Readying for the Halloween banquet starts early, as mamas and grandmamas descend upon the kitchen like a gathering of worried birds. Ovens moan, containers crash, and clouds of powder drift through the atmosphere as youngsters are solidly shooed from every practical surface. There's a distinct atmosphere of enthusiasm, partially because anything surpasses boiled turnip, and partially because there's a whisper that somebody's relative once prepared genuine cake. The focal point of the feast is typically a large container of stew bubbling forth with an ingredient catalogue that's both adaptable and mysterious. Nobody poses excessive questions. Provided it's heated, substantial, and doesn't shift, it's regarded as a success. Accompanying the stew are bread crusts, occasionally enhanced with a coating of drippings or a glossy layer of treacle. You consume with your digits crossed, wishing to bypass the piece that's been waiting at the base since Michaelmas. But tonight there's additional. This is the sole evening when rewards surface, modest by contemporary measures but legendary material in the Victorian dwelling. Spirit. Cakes are circulated, tiny and sturdy, sweetened sufficiently to suggest luxury. Some are circular, some somewhat lopsided, but all are marked with a cross and a prayer for the departed souls. If fortune favours you, you grab a second one when nobody's watching, a tiny deed of defiance that feels more dangerous than cabbage throwing. Parkin cake, a sticky ginger-saturated square cherished in the north, could make an entrance, disintegrating beneath your utensil and adhering itself to your teeth for hours. There's nut bread too, if the autumn was bountiful and the household squirrely enough to conceal some hazelnuts from the neighbours' youngsters. And everywhere, containers of roasted seeds, pumpkin if you're wealthy, sunflower if you're practical, and puzzle seeds if you're existing dangerously. Sweet items are scarce and thus worshipped. Treacle toffee is the supreme reward. Created in a container so ancient it could serve as an archaeological discovery, the toffee is emptied onto a stone surface and shattered with the household rolling stick, producing irregular fragments that adhere to your molars, with sufficient determination to persist through the following school period. The regulation is plain. If you can masticate it without sacrificing a tooth, you receive a second fragment. No Victorian banquet would be finished without some burnt sweetener. There's invariably somebody, an eager relative or an hopeful papa, who determines to create sugar formations in the flames. The outcomes range from delicately caramelized chunks to complete cinders, but it barely concerns. You chomp into your burnt sweetener, acting like it's precisely how you prefer it, because you recognize better than to object when genuine sweetness is available. The feast is noisy and disorderly, interrupted by the clatter of utensils and the sporadic shriek as somebody discovers a pebble in their seed cake. Ghost tales are traded between chomps, with youngsters gathering nearer to the fireplace, sticky digits and huge eyes. The grown-ups act above it all, but their dishes are equally as filled with rewards and equally as rapidly cleared. By the dinner's conclusion, the dwelling is saturated with the combined scents of stew, smoke, and somewhat scorched sweetener. Stomachs are satisfied, spirits are brighter, and everyone concurs that tonight the nutrition tastes like a tiny, persistent success. It might not be a royal feast, but on Halloween in Victorian England it experiences like a banquet appropriate for royalty, if the royalty didn't object to some soot in their dessert. Once the final sticky fragment of parking cake is extracted from your teeth and the sitting room is saturated with the scent of burnt sweetener and thick wood smoke, the evening's genuine entertainment can start, the ghost pursuit. In Victorian England, it's not Halloween unless at minimum one person insists to have witnessed something paranormal. And the more candles you ignite, the more probable it is that Uncle Herbert will claim he's been haunted since 1842. Ghost pursuing is a household matter, partially ceremony, partially theatre, and entirely essential for an authentic Halloween. It begins with the ceremonial igniting of candles. The household canine is immediately exiled outdoors, following last year's phantom situation involving a toppled candle holder and a singed tail. Shadows leap across the wall covering, providing every nook a threatening atmosphere. This is when the most courageous youngsters commence scouting the dwelling for ghosts, lantern in palm, nerves maintained together by the slenderest thread of courage. The pursuit is formally directed by the eldest sibling, who equips themselves with a poker, or maybe a rolled newspaper. Just in situation, the ghost is sensitive to stern Victorian authority. The remaining group spreads out, investigating every corridor and storage space with the variety of thoroughness typically reserved for searching for missing fasteners. Each floorboard sound and pane vibration is grabbed upon as proof. "That wasn't the wind," someone whispers, and as if on cue, the breeze whistles through a crack in the cornice. Every dresser is searched, and every drape gets a shake. The favourite spot is the attic, probably because of the stories that it's haunted by the tragic figure of Cousin Thomas, who was once shut in there for eating every last mince pie. The cat, seeing a chance for some theatrical flair, springs out from behind an old chest and is immediately declared a witch's familiar. Grandmother, watching from her chair, grumbles that back in her day, the spirits at least had the courtesy to appear completely headless. Ghost hunting here is more than just frightening one another. It's an entire lesson in Victorian imagination. Every imperfection on the wall becomes a spectral face. Every old, damaged shawl is now a ghostly veil. And any strange odour is, without fail, blamed on the supernatural. Even the adults get caught up in the fun. Father swears he saw the blinds shift, while Mother is certain she felt a cold patch in the storeroom, completely ignoring the draughty window she refuses to mend. Next come the tales shared in low voices by the glow of the lamp. Uncle Herbert is the undisputed master, managing to make even a creaking floorboard sound like a sign from the great beyond. His stories are peppered with dramatic halts and the occasional clanking of chains, conveniently supplied by his pocket watch and a lively imagination. The children hug their knees and listen to every syllable, their eyes huge, unsure whether to burst out laughing or dive under the furniture. Inevitably, one child gets too spooked and begs to sit on Mother's lap, while another insists they see a face pressed against the glass. The suspense builds until the youngest child, always the unpredictable one, suddenly yells, "Boo!" sending half the family jumping right out of their seats. For a brief moment, utter chaos takes over. Lamps wobble, tea spills, and the family's spirit search nearly ends in ruin. By the end of the evening, the house is still upright, most of the lights are still lit, and no one can settle the argument over whether Cousin Thomas's ghost was truly present, or if the commotion was just the cat again. Everyone is drained, thrilled, and just a little more convinced of the paranormal than they were at dinner. As the lanterns are extinguished and the group heads off to their beds, you realise the ghost hunt was a triumph. Not because a spirit was captured, but because for one enchanted night the entire household believed in something a little bit out of the ordinary. That, after all, is the true meaning of a Victorian All Hallows Eve, a night where shadows lengthen, narratives are wilder, and even the air feels haunted. The moment dinner is finished and the ghost stories have calmed down to a quiet hum of whispered theories, the evening's most awaited adventure commences, the doorstep solicitation rite. Victorian youngsters aren't content just to wait for handouts. They venture out to try and obtain treats from their neighbours. Armed with resolve, makeshift outfits, and a collection of questionable verses sufficient to annoy the whole area for weeks, you bundle up against the brisk October air, clutching your homemade lamp, a turnip, not a pumpkin, since this is England, naturally, and merge with your friends into the rolling mist. The older kids take the lead. practicing the chants they'll recite at each door. The bravest one in the group carries the backup potato, a handy item for both tricking and treating as needed. Knocking on doors is a communal activity, but it's also a trial of courage and social skill. The initial house is always the most difficult. You crowd onto the porch, jostling each other with equal parts eagerness and nerves. The most daring person gives a sharp rap on the door, and everyone else shuffles their feet trying to recall the verse. Soul, soul, for a soul cake, I pray, good mistress, a soul cake. The tune is sung poorly, and the rhythm is never quite right, but the earnestness is clear. For a moment, the adults on the other side of the door face a group of smudged-faced children gazing up with huge eyes and high hopes, all attempting to look as innocent as possible while wearing a crooked mask of soot. Sometimes the door opens to a neighbour who has been ready with a basket of fruit, some toasted nuts, or the famous soul cake. If you're exceptionally lucky, you might receive a piece of fruit cake or a lump of burnt caramel, treasures to be hidden and eaten slowly before your siblings notice. Other times you're met only with a harsh expression and a scolding about not bothering respectable people at this hour. If you leave without anything, custom dictates you murmur a hex or threaten a minor prank like repositioning the garden ornaments or hanging a cabbage on the gate. Victorian door knocking is part show, part negotiation, and entirely mayhem. Some residents demand a song or a poem, or worse, a dance. If you can sing, you're in high demand, shuttled from house to house with requests for an encore. Those less gifted musically simply hide in the back, hoping to avoid attention, occasionally chiming in with a clumsy thank you when a treat is secured. Of course, there's an element of danger. Some households are strict about after-dark callers. The neighbourhood officer is always roaming, ready to disperse gatherings, and warn children of severe consequences for public disturbance. There's a hushed tale that last year old Mrs. Puddlewick threw a bucket of water on the entire treat-seeking crowd, a story that has become local law and a warning to approach her steps with caution or a waterproof coat. Despite the hazards, soliciting treats is a high point of the night. Children dash from door to door, their lamps swaying in the fog, their greetings and laughter echoing down the paved streets. Rival groups cross paths, exchanging boasts about their candy or warnings about sour neighbours. The night turns into a blend of sounds, voices, rushing footsteps, and the occasional thump of a potato rolling into a drain. Every collection is counted, every treat is split up, and every insult or prank is retold with growing dramatisation. As the hours pass, you feel the cold nip at your cheeks, your fingers sticky with molasses, or holding a warm nut. And you know this is exactly what All Hallows Eve should feel like, a night of chants, fellowship, and mild threats disguised as poetry. By the close of the ritual, you've gathered a lumpy handful of the neighbourhood's best contributions, suffered a few rejections, and made it through the ordeal of singing, dancing, and potential drenching. Door knocking in Victorian England isn't just about the sweets. It's about guts, resourcefulness, and ensuring every resident on the street remembers your name. If not for your outfit, then at least for that mysterious potato left on their doorstep. Just when you think your teeth have survived apple bobbing and your pride has recovered from door knocking, it's time for another cherished Victorian Halloween game, ducking for nuts. Part amusement park game, part risk to your dental health, and entirely chaotic, this after-dark competition is less about actually winning a nut and more about demonstrating your merit to your friends and giving free entertainment to the adults who gather round with warm drinks and a taste for physical comedy. The setup is almost absurdly simple. Someone retrieves a shallow bowl, often the same one used earlier for the apples, still suspiciously wet and now a little sugary. Into this go a random mix of nuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, and the rare almond. In a fancier area, occasionally someone throws in a hard sweet or a marble just to make things more thrilling and potentially hazardous. The rules, if you can call them that, are classically Victorian. Hands secured behind your back, face plunged into the bowl, and absolutely no complaining about the water's chill or the general mushy consistency of the bottom. The adults hovering nearby offer encouragement like, "Don't hold back," and the occasional threat, "Watch the tablecloth or you'll be sleeping in the coal scuttle." One after another, the children take their turn. The first courageous soul dives in, eyes shut tightly, and emerges moments later with a nut clutched triumphantly in their teeth, or more likely with water pouring down their face and an air of mild disappointment. The nuts, being round and tricky, slide away at the last moment, or bob just beyond reach as everyone cheers, groans, and offers suggestions that are only half useful. "Go left! No! Your other left!" By the third round, the water is a slurry of floating husks, bits of dust, and probably a rogue piece of fruit from dinner. Nobody cares. In Victorian times, cleanliness is secondary to custom, and tonight, no one is above a little shared head dunking for the sake of fun. Siblings try to trip each other with timely splashes, and even the most reserved cousin is persuaded to try, egged on by the guarantee of a toasted nut or the rare glory of being declared the year's nut champion. Of course, not every attempt is a success. There's always someone who comes up with nothing but a mouthful of water and frustration, or worse, manages to knock the entire bowl off the table in their enthusiasm. The resulting spill is met with shouts of laughter and rushed clean-up from a frustrated aunt who mumbles about the same mess every year. The family dog appears, nose twitching, hoping to snatch a dropped hazelnut before being shooed away for interfering with the sacred rite. The game isn't without its dangers. A poorly judged lunge can leave you with a nut wedged in a spot only the apothecary can reach. An unusually sharp walnut might give you a renewed appreciation for your one remaining baby tooth. But for every choking sound, slip or spray, there's twice as much laughter in the dancing light of the candles. You feel a wild happiness that has nothing to do with rewards and everything to do with being young, bold, and slightly soaked. As the game continues, the rivalry intensifies, sibling grudges flare up, wagers are placed, and every successful bite is met with applause. The final nut is eventually caught by the quiet cousin no one expected to win, and is instantly crowned with the closest, least damp hat. It's a small victory, but in a home with so many minor setbacks, scorched dessert, scratchy socks, vegetable on the roof, it feels huge. By the end, the floor is wet, the bowl is empty, and the room is filled with the cheerful disorder of Halloween night. There are stories to recount of brave plunges and improbable victories, and sticky hands to be cleaned, if anyone can locate the soap. Ducking for nuts may leave you wetter than when you started, but it's the sort of classic fun that makes you forget the cold and remember, if only for a little while, that being a Victorian child meant finding delight in even the simplest activities. By the time the clock approaches what Victorians optimistically call the hour for rest, the streets and parlours are overflowing with mischief. Kids are hyper on burned sugar, excitement, and sheer tradition, tossing produce, chanting door-knocking rhymes, and daring each other to venture into the spooky corners of the house. It's the peak of Halloween, but before absolute anarchy can erupt, an opposing force emerges from the darkness, the parental patrol. You'll see them everywhere tonight, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, and the occasional severe-looking grandmother who once scared off a mob of ruffians with nothing but her rolling pin and a frown. The parental patrol is part safety team, part umpire, and part unwilling participant. Their objective is to keep the disorder entertaining but not disastrous, and to make sure everyone returns with all the fingers and self-respect they began the evening with. They're experts in subtle observation. No matter how secretive you think you're being, you'll look up to find a parent lurking near the light, arms folded, lips pursed, waiting to catch you in the act. If you're trading footwear with your cousin, chances are your mother witnessed the entire exchange from behind the curtains. If you're sneaking out for one last raid on the neighbour's vegetable patch, an uncle is already following you, pretending he's just out for some fresh air. Intervention strategies vary widely. Some parents use the classic severe warning delivered with the gravity of a royal decree. If I see one more turnip in the well, I swear. Others prefer the direct extraction method, a quick grab by the collar and a lecture about the hazards of falling into the pond in your best clothes. There are always a few who favour the divert and distract technique, suddenly producing a plate of toasted nuts or an impromptu ghost story to herd the most active pranksters. Yet, for all their efforts, the parental patrol is walking a fine line. Halloween is supposed to involve some trickery after all. Secretly, many of them treasure these nights just as much as the children do. You'll catch a father holding back a smile as he confiscates a homemade stink bomb, or a mother suppressing a laugh when she finds her shoes full of cold breakfast cereal. Sometimes the most serious grown-ups are the very ones who once slipped a frog into your lunchbox when they were young. Still, the patrol has its boundaries. The truly naughty are issued the final ultimatum, an early bedtime. Keep it up, and it's lights out before the last story, your mother warns, sending shivers through the room that no ghost tale ever could. The older children, seasoned in the ways of Halloween, know how to push right to the limit, never quite shattering the family's patience, but never completely giving up the thrill of the prank. Out on the street, parent alliances are formed. Neighbours exchange knowing looks, quietly agreeing to supervise each other's children and trade stories about whose child ended up with the most flour on their head. The officer, an unofficial member of the patrol, makes his rounds with an exaggerated sigh, complaining about kids these days, while secretly pocketing the occasional soul cake. Inevitably, there are moments when the patrol lets its guard down. Someone's father joins the game, chasing the kids around with a broom, only to trip over a vegetable and provide a tale that will be recounted until next Halloween. An aunt completely forgets her mission, dissolving into laughter during the ducking for nuts contest. For one magnificent night, the boundary between child and adult becomes blurred. By the end of the evening, the parental patrol's duty is complete. The worst of the chaos is gently contained. The casualties, mostly wounded egos and squashed produce, are accounted for, and everyone is hurried home with threats of baths and warm milk. The parents put away their lanterns, count their children, and, for a brief moment, revel in the peculiar satisfaction of a job well done. Because ultimately, Victorian Halloween is about both parts of the narrative. The wild, thrilling energy of childhood mischief and the steady, caring watchfulness of those determined to keep the magic just safe enough to endure another year. After a long night of uproar, trickery and mystery, Victorian Halloween still has one last surprise up its soot-stained sleeve: fortune-telling. In living rooms across England, the fires burn low, lights flicker, and children and adults alike gather for a final rite that promises to glimpse the future with little more than common household objects and a vivid imagination. For one night, everyone gets to be a prophet, or at least an expressive guesser with a talent for interpreting doubtful signs. The tools of this trade are as ordinary as everything else in the Victorian home. There's no gazing ball, only a cracked teacup, a bent utensil, and whatever can be retrieved from the pantry. The most popular Halloween predictions concern love and marriage, and few games stir up more excitement or nervous laughter than these. The simplest ritual involves peeling a whole onion in one long continuous piece. If you manage it, you are destined for true love, or at the very least you'll impress your relatives with your dexterity. Some families prefer the egg white in water method. You break an egg into a glass and watch as the white twists and curls, forming strange shapes. Is that a ship, a wedding ring, or just a disturbing resemblance to Aunt Mildred's pet dog? Every spectator has a different interpretation, and arguments erupt as future, weddings, voyages and professions are all foretold with great seriousness, at least until someone's giggling derails the solemnity. Another favourite involves naming hazelnuts after the people you admire and throwing them into the fire. If your nut burns steadily, your affection is true. If it bursts or splits, heartbreak is ahead. This custom is part spectacle, part accident, since an overzealous toss can send hot embers flying, causing siblings to shriek and earning you a severe look from whichever parent is nearest the fireplace. The grown-ups are never excluded from the fun. Mothers recall the predictions they received as girls, usually involving indistinct shapes in glowing mirrors, midnight walks through the orchard, and secret admirers revealed by the way a candle dripped. Some insist that if you gaze into a darkened mirror at midnight, you'll catch a glimpse of your future spouse's face peering over your shoulder. Children try it, only to flee screaming when their own reflection, or a playful brother, jumps out of the dark. Not all predictions are about romance, however. There are games for good fortune and wealth, too. Apple seeds are stuck to the forehead, and whichever one remains the longest is said to foretell riches, intelligence, or long life, though most just fall off and stick to the dog instead. Melted metal dripped into water forms peculiar sculptures that everyone takes turns interpreting, with each new blob spun into a hopeful tale. That one's clearly a crown, which means I'll be royalty, or at least get the biggest piece of dessert. The most dramatic predictions are reserved for the boldest children, those who brave the backyard at midnight armed with nothing but a lamp and a slice of bread. Legend says if you walk around the garden 3 times in silence, you'll hear your future spoken on the wind. Most return, reporting nothing but chills and the feeling that the neighbour's cat is plotting their downfall. What unites all these customs is the sense of shared anticipation and wonder. The prophecies are absurd, the tools are basic, but for a few magical minutes, everyone in the room believes in possibilities, romantic, lucky, or simply bizarre. The laughter, the gasps, the gentle mocking as fortunes are read aloud all blend together to create a feeling of warmth and optimism that is more valuable than any actual prediction. So as the last fortunes are told and the final nut burns away, you realise that Victorian Halloween is about more than just tricks and treats. It's about gathering together by the light of the fire, daring to imagine what the future holds and finding a little bit of magic in the everyday. Onion skins, egg whites, and all. Halloween in Victorian England would feel incomplete without the final spectacular blaze, the community fire. When you are a child in a time where lighting is usually a single smoky lamp and explosives are seen as both entertainment and mild artillery, the sudden sight of a massive roaring fire in the middle of a muddy field feels like pure unsupervised sorcery. The excitement begins as soon as the sun sets. Children march through the streets carrying their lopsided turnip lanterns, the light barely piercing the heavy autumn fog. In backyards and public spaces, mounds of wood, old furniture, and the occasional broken wheelbarrow mysteriously appear. No one asks too many questions about their origin, if it will burn its welcome. Adults do their best to oversee, but mostly they stand back, holding mugs of tea or something stronger, pretending they're in charge while quietly hoping nothing important catches fire. The privilege of lighting the bonfire usually goes to the oldest or bravest kid, armed with a sputtering match and cheered on by a loud chorus of friends. There is a moment of bated breath. Will the kindling catch, or will it just fizzle out? This is followed by triumphant shouts as the flames shoot skyward. Instantly, faces glow orange, and everyone moves closer, as much for comfort as for the show. The fire transforms the cold, misty night into a space of moving shadows, laughter, and ghost stories retold in the smoky light. And then come the fireworks, depending on how tolerant or oblivious the local authorities are that year. A box of bottle rockets, a few questionable sparklers, and maybe even a pinwheel nailed to a fence. Someone's uncle insists he knows precisely how to set them off safely, which causes everyone else to take a generous step back. The display is part beautiful, part chaos. Rockets scream, fountains sputter, and more than one explosive tips over and rushes through the crowd, causing a sudden rush and a wave of nervous laughter. The adults yell warnings and children scatter, only to circle back, giddy with the thrill of the near-miss excitement. Despite the risks, and they are considerable, bonfires and fireworks are the heart of the Victorian Halloween night. The fire is hypnotic, huge logs crackling, sparks whirling up into the darkness, the air filled with the rich, unmistakable aroma of burning wood and wet dirt. Everyone gathers around, families, neighbours, the town gossip, even the stray dogs, all attracted to the warmth and the light. The event becomes an unplanned town gathering, a temporary pause in the ongoing vegetable wars. In between the firework bursts, children roast anything they can find: apples, nuts, sometimes bread on a stick, sometimes a slightly blackened sausage if someone's feeling generous. Tales of past Halloween nights are exchanged, warnings of "don't get too close" are mostly ignored, and parents attempt to keep account of their children as they dart in and out of the shadows. At the night's high point, the bonfire roars its tallest, throwing enormous dancing silhouettes against the houses and fences. For a moment, the whole world feels both ancient and vibrant, a little dangerous, a little wild, and completely memorable. Eventually the fire dies down, the last firework fades out, and miraculously everyone leaves with their eyebrows intact. Bonfires and fireworks might have been technically frowned upon or even against the law depending on the municipality, but on Halloween in Victorian England no one seems to mind. It's one final burst of communal disorder before the cold and quiet settle in again, and for children and adults alike it's the most vivid memory of the year as the bonfire's final sparks disappear and children's faces softly glow in the afterglow. Halloween night in Victorian England turns into a spinning vortex of superstition. This is the hour when every old wives' tale comes alive, when a creaking floorboard might signal a ghost, and the family cat suddenly holds the fate of your eternal soul in its tiny, judging paw. Superstitions are the true foundation of Victorian Halloween. Every family, every street, has its own unique collection, passed down from grandmothers who always claimed to just know these things. Some superstitions are widespread, some wonderfully regional. All are designed to keep you cautiously alert or just nervous enough to behave, at least until midnight. Black cats, for instance, are everywhere, and their reputation is complicated. In some homes, seeing one on Halloween means good fortune, provided it crosses your path from left to right and doesn't stop to stare at you. In others, a black cat means you must immediately knock on wood, spit over your shoulder, and hope you didn't just invite 7 years of bad luck. Cats, being themselves, play both sides, sneaking in the shadows, accepting bribes, and knocking over turnip lamps at the most inconvenient times. Mirrors, meanwhile, are not just for checking your outfit on Halloween night. They are gateways, or so you've been told. If you dare to look into a mirror at midnight by candlelight, legend says you'll see your future spouse's face, or a skull, or perhaps the neighbour's cat again, depending on the angle and your nerves. Most children last about 2 seconds before shrieking and running from the room, convinced they saw a shadow, which is instantly added to the household's running ghost count. Death omens are common. Hear a dog wailing at the moon? Someone in the area is doomed. Find a feather on your pillow? Sleep with one eye open. The bravest, almost reckless children tell stories of seeing a winding sheet, the spectral burial cloth of someone destined to die, folding itself at the foot of a bed. Even something as minor as an unexpected knock at the door after midnight is cause for alarm, though it's usually just a cousin hoping for leftover caramel. Then there are the classic Victorian cautions. Never sweep after dark or you'll sweep away your luck. Never leave shoes upside down, it invites the devil. And never, under any circumstance, point at a graveyard from your window. If you do, you must immediately touch metal or risk being followed home by something from the other side. All these rules are impossible to keep track of, which is likely the whole point. By the time you've figured out which pocket holds your lucky coin and which door you haven't visited yet, you're too distracted to cause any serious trouble. Superstitions extend to food too. If you bite into an apple and find a worm, you're cursed, unless you quickly toss the core over your left shoulder and spin around 3 times. Cutting a cake into uneven pieces is said to invite family disputes, hence every child claims their slice is just right, no matter how crooked it is. As the hour gets late, parents tend the fire, adults exchange increasingly scary tales, and the youngest children move closer to the warmth, eyes wide and ears full of warnings. The boundary between fun and fear dissolves. You're not sure if you're thrilled, scared, or just cold. Halloween in Victorian England isn't only about tricks and treats. This is a night where the eerie unknown creeps in and old folklore takes centre stage. Every jittery glance and every superstition is really just a way to draw the household nearer, since nothing quite unites a family like the mere chance that the mirror, the cat, or the wind is concealing something you cannot entirely explain. Once the evening's activities are settling down and the glowing embers of the bonfire have warmed your cheeks, there remains one final ritual, enjoying the infamous, slightly risky spread of Victorian Halloween treats. Forget all of those pre-packaged candies or neatly wrapped chocolate bars. Here, the snacks are prepared at home, they're unpredictable, and they are guaranteed to leave a mark on your teeth, or perhaps occasionally take one with them. The first thing on every child's mind is treacle toffee. This confection is the monarch of all Victorian Halloween sweets. It's dark, intensely sticky, and should only be tackled with a mix of great respect and recent dental records. The entire process begins in the kitchen with a banged-up old pan and the closest thing to a recipe, which usually calls for big estimations and an old serving spoon. A mix of treacle, sugar, a little bit of butter, and a dash of vinegar is heated until your mother insists it smells just right, or until the kitchen is full of smoke and the windows must be flung wide open. The pouring of the toffee is a major event. Children gather around the kitchen table as the glossy, rapidly bubbling mixture is spread out onto a sheet of slate, a baking tray, or, when in a rush, the cleanest section of the countertop. Everyone waits, shuffling for the important moment, the shattering using the family rolling pin or the flat side of a heavy spoon. The toffee is broken into irregular, sharp fragments with each piece unique, posing a novel challenge to molar endurance. Other seasonal snacks soon appear. There's parkin cake, which is dense and aromatic, with treacle and ginger, served in pieces that leave your clothes, and certainly your hands, tacky for hours. Roasted chestnuts are passed around, distributed in worn handkerchiefs, hot enough to burn your tongue if you're too impatient. Sometimes a platter of burnt sugar confections shows up, the remnants of someone's elaborate attempt at creating edible art. These treats range from a perfect golden brown to completely charred black, with flavours that can flip from sheer delight to total failure in one small bite. These Halloween snacks are far more than just food. They become a form of edible storytelling. Every sticky confection is connected to a family anecdote. The time the toffee hardened too fast and nearly yanked out Uncle Albert's dentures, or the year a sugar sculpture melted mid-tail right into the fire. Siblings negotiate and trade, vying for the largest slice of parkin or the corner piece of toffee. The rivalries are fierce. One child might secretly tuck an extra chestnut into a coat pocket, only to find it days later, now a relic, of course. These sweets also serve as fuel for the mischief that remains. With all that sugar rushing through your system, you are ready to bolt into the dark, mock the old superstitions, or bravely enter the rattling attic in a search for ghosts. The grown-ups, meanwhile, savour a moment by the fire, drinking tea or something stronger, and enjoying the unusual calm that arrives once the children are distracted by dessert. Not every snack is sweet, though. There's usually a large bowl of roasted seeds, maybe sunflower or pumpkin if you're lucky, and a mix if your family is frugal and not too choosy. The flavour is slightly burnt, smoky and salty, but no one utters a complaint. After an evening spent ducking for nuts, bobbing for apples, and throwing cabbages, even the most basic snack tastes like a reward for successfully making it through another year of Halloween pandemonium. By the time the last chunk of toffee is removed from your teeth and the final crumb of parkin is claimed, the wild energy in the room has settled. You feel tired, satisfied, and a bit sticky all over. The treats may be simple, but they are absolutely unforgettable, much like Victorian Halloween itself. In a world that existed before commercially packaged treats, a handful of crunchy burnt sugar and a belly full of new stories is the perfect way to finish the night. As the evening deepens, a notable split opens up across Victorian England, a gap between the city and the country that's as wide as the closest cabbage patch and as heated as any sibling rivalry. City and country Halloween rituals may share the same mischievous core, but the sound, the scope, and the style of their chaos are dramatically different. In the cities, the festivities are a booming symphony of loud laughter, shouts, and echoing footsteps bouncing off rows of dark brick buildings. Gas lamps project flickering shadows onto the cobblestones, and the thick fog makes it hard to distinguish between a small ghost and a costumed child. Children roam in roving groups, rushing from one doorway to the next, either soliciting treats or planning intricate tricks that use the whole street as their stage. Mischief in the city is competitive and public. The cleverest tricksters exchange tales in the shadowy alleys, boasting about switching Mrs. Featherstone's boots with Mr. Grubbs's, or who managed to cover the most windows with soap before the local officer appeared. The close proximity of city living and the constantly watchful neighbours mean pranks are loud and done quickly. A spray of flour here, a cabbage there, and then a quick getaway before anyone can get a clear look. Urban bonfires are generally makeshift fires in unused lots, assembled from mystery wood and broken chairs, observed by half the neighbourhood and criticised by the other half. The biggest highlight of City Halloween might be the collective gasp as a homemade firework launches sideways, hurtling directly toward the grocer's shop. Laughter follows the shrieks, and even the stern rebukes from parents become a necessary part of the ritual. Rural Halloween, by contrast, is a different world entirely. It's darker, quieter, and spread out across the scattered cottages and rolling fields. The sounds are notably different, the crackling of enormous bonfires in open meadows, the distant call of an owl, the quiet sound of families huddling together for companionship and warmth. Out here, pranks tend to be more drawn out, sometimes even involving farm animals. There is always a story about last year's ambitious plan to befall goat to the church steeple. With fewer residents and much more space, the tricks last longer. You might find a cabbage in your boot days later, or discover the town's signpost strangely pointing straight into the vicar's hedge. Rural traditions have their own distinct sense of danger and their own unique charm. The darkness feels deeper, the superstitions are more potent, and the barrier between the mystical and the living seems a little bit thinner. Fortune-telling takes a central place in the farmhouse parlour, with plenty of time for candle wax drips, egg whites, and hushed predictions made near the fire. Bonfires in the country are wider and higher, illuminating the land for miles and often topped by a crude effigy, sometimes a scarecrow, sometimes a particularly ugly turnip. The treats reflect the setting. Country children might gnaw on apples taken straight from the orchard, or chestnuts roasted slowly in the bonfire ashes. City kids trade for a chunk of treacle toffee, or a piece of parkin pilfered from kitchen window sills and passed around in greasy wrapping paper. Both sides are completely sure their version of Halloween is superior, and both have the stories ready to prove it. As the night continues, the differences start to fade. Children drift off to sleep by the fire in city parlours or farmhouse kitchens, their costumes a mess and their hands still sticky with burnt sugar residue. Ultimately, whether you are running from the village goose or the city officer, Halloween in Victorian England is all about great stories, shared mischief, and the delicious feeling of having gotten away with something, regardless of where you call home. So, as the bonfires burn down and the last of the tricks are pulled, the argument persists. Country or town? Which Halloween celebration is the best? The answer, as any Victorian child would quickly tell you, depends entirely on where you wake up the next morning and how many cabbages have somehow ended up in your bed. As the final moments tick closer to midnight and the streets quiet down, broken only by a rolling stray cabbage in the gutter or the occasional echo of faraway laughter, a strange hush descends upon the house. It's the moment when, if you are lucky or perhaps just a little bit cursed, you get invited to a Halloween sleepover complete with the most electrifying ritual of all, the Victorian séance. Victorian England was famously preoccupied with the supernatural. It seemed everyone, from the Queen herself to the lowliest apprentice chimney sweep, believed that the dead could communicate, particularly on a night like this. So, when a small group of children, completely energised by sugar, exhausted from the night, and desperate to prove their courage, gathers in the parlour or attic, the séance commences. The setup manages to be both earnest and spooky. Blankets are spread across the floor and someone drags out an overturned crate or a wobbly table. The room is dimly lit by the flickering, soft light of candles, arranged carefully so the dancing shadows make everyone start to doubt the wisdom of the whole enterprise. Each child clasps a hand, creating a serious circle, while one self-appointed medium demands silence and takes command of the room with a voice that is part nervous and part over-dramatic. "Spirits of Halloween, we beckon you," the leader intones, their eyebrows wiggling with a mixture of nerves and theatrical flair. Sometimes a makeshift talking board appears featuring letters drawn onto scrap paper and a planchette carved from a slice of turnip or a small saucer. Other times, the medium uses the classic Victorian technique, the glass turned upside down, shaking slightly as a dozen nervous fingers barely touch the edge. With every sudden gust of wind, every floorboard creak, the group whispers and jumps, absolutely certain that Aunt Mildred's ghost is about to share her opinion on the missing silverware. There is a precise etiquette to these séances. First, you are never to let go of each other's hands, unless, of course, you absolutely must grab the cat, who inevitably finds a way to insert itself into the circle at the most dramatic moment. Second, no laughing is allowed, at least not until someone's elbow knocks over a candle, sending half the group scrambling for safety, or the medium accidentally burps. Inevitably, someone asks the spirits for a sign, a sigh, a tap, or a mysterious cold draft. Most of the time, it is nothing more than the cold air coming from the window, but there's always that one fraction of a second when the table gives a tremor or the candle flickers and every pair of eyes goes wide. Occasionally the saucer moves, spelling out gibberish, or the planchette floats toward the word yes, triggering shouts and accusations of being possessed or cheating, which for sleepover law is even better. The most foolish or the bravest child will inevitably ask the spirits questions like, "Who will marry first? Will I be rich one day? Is Old Man Jenkins truly a werewolf?" The answers, when they come at all, are vague, garbled, or suspiciously beneficial to the medium. Someone's older cousin claims they once received an actual message from the other side, though it sounded suspiciously like Uncle Herbert with a dish rag pulled over his head. But the actual answers are irrelevant. The entire point is the delicious, spine-tingling tension, the feeling that every breath is electric, every giggle quickly silenced, every sound a potential sign from the spirit world. For a fleeting moment, everyone in that circle believes, or desperately wants to believe, that the boundary between the worlds is thin and that the night is full of mysteries just waiting to be revealed. By the time the candles have nearly burned out and the parents rap on the door, Everyone's heart is thumping with nervousness, excitement, and a small bit of regret over all the burnt sugar consumed earlier. Regardless of whether the spirits actually showed up, everyone has a story to tell and a Halloween memory that lasts long after the sun rises on November the 1st. Halloween in Victorian England is supposed to be about bump in the nights, ghosts and mischief, but somewhere between the apple bobbing and the bonfires a quieter feeling sneaks in. Romance, shy and clumsy, arrives like a draft through a cracked pane of glass. And suddenly, Halloween becomes the absolute perfect night for blushing dares and candlelit crushes. It all begins harmlessly enough. There is a palpable thrill in putting on a costume, pretending that you are someone else for a single evening, hidden behind a tattered shawl or a mask smudged with soot. Victorian children, normally constrained by rigid manners and an endless list of things they must and must not do, find a strange freedom in disguise. The bolder boys don a ragged cloak or an extra-large hat, declare themselves vampires or highwaymen, and use the night's mischief as a perfect excuse to show off a little. Girls, meanwhile, giggle over makeshift fortune-telling rites, accidentally get paired up for apple snapping and exchange glances across the crowded parlour. The candlelight helps, shadows flicker on the walls, making everyone look a bit more mysterious, and the everyday rules are relaxed just enough to allow for a little bit of flirting. If you are particularly clever, you'll manage to arrange to walk home with your favourite companion, using the excuse of needing safety in numbers. Maybe you'll take turns daring each other to knock on the most frightening doors, or hold the same flickering turnip lantern. There are certain classic Victorian games meant to subtly encourage romance. The parlour fills with noise as nuts are given names and thrown into the fire, or apple seeds are pressed to foreheads. If your nut burns brightly and strong, your love is true. If it sizzles or pops, you can expect to be teased for weeks. Partners are selected for apple snapping. Hands brush when you both reach for the same treat, and for a fleeting moment, there is something in the air that is even sweeter than toffee. Fortune-telling reaches its climax here. Girls line up to carefully peel apples in a single spiral, then throw the peel over their shoulder, hoping it lands in the shape of their sweetheart's initial. Boys attempt to sneak glances, hoping their own name will appear in the curl. If the group is especially daring, someone might try the mirror trick, staring into a candlelit looking glass at midnight to catch a glimpse of their future beloved. The boldest children claim to see a face and immediately blush bright red when pushed for more details. Outside, the darkness is full of chances for secret gestures. A whispered joke shared in the dark, a daring hand squeeze as you dash across a lawn, or a cabbage playfully tossed at your crush's feet. The rules are relaxed all around. Siblings do not tease quite as much. Parents are occupied with the bonfires, and the boundary between friendship and something more is as hazy as the autumn mist. Of course, no one would dare call it dating. That is far too modern and much too bold. Victorian romance is a subtle game of hints, dares and quick glances. It is the pure joy of realising that the person you like saved you the largest piece of parkin or let you win at ducking for nuts. Well, almost. In a world where so much is chaperoned and restricted, a night like this feels like a gasp of possibility that was stolen. By the time the lanterns are flickering low and the children are being ushered home, those small moments linger. A shared slice of treacle toffee, a borrowed shawl, the memory of a burst of laughter in the dark. These are the sweet beginnings of stories that will be whispered for weeks and remembered for many years. Halloween, for all its frights, is also a night for a gentle kind of hope. In the soft, moving glow of the candlelight, romance always finds a way, even if, the next morning, everyone pretends it never happened. Eventually, the lanterns are dim, the sweets are gone, and the final embers of the last bonfire collapse into the night. It's time for the most overlooked and yet most desperately awaited moment in the entire Victorian Halloween experience. bedtime. You would assume that after an evening spent running wild through dark streets, dodging cabbages and whispering spooky stories, sleep would come easily. But in a cold, drafty Victorian bedroom, every shadow is a potential ghost, every creak is suspicious, and every bedsheet is a possible hiding place for someone's leftover turnip. First, there's the long ritual of getting ready for bed. Costumes are torn off in a flurry of knots, buttons, and sibling fights. The soot from your alley phantom disguise leaves distinct handprints on your face and dark streaks on the wash basin, which your mother will certainly complain about the next morning. Itchy shirts and wool stockings are removed with great relief, tossed into a large communal laundry pile that grows more ominous by the minute. If you are lucky, your nightshirt was warming next to the fire. If not, you take a deep breath and pull on something as cold and unyielding as the gravestones in the churchyard. Climbing into a bed in a Victorian home is an adventure in itself. The pillow is lumpy, the mattress sags, and the sheets are so cold they practically squeak. Siblings sleep crammed together, sometimes for comfort, sometimes just for warmth, and there is always one child who claims the bed nearest the wall is actually haunted. The bravest among you make fun of them, but even they keep their feet securely covered. There is a strange comfort in sleeping side by side with your sisters and brothers, everyone wrapped up in scratchy blankets, and the familiar, comforting smell of burnt sugar, cabbages, and the great outdoors. Outside. The wind rattles the window panes, and the last remaining traces of bonfire smoke drift through the cracks in the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog's howl sets off a fresh round of shivers and more than a few muttered prayers. You tug your blanket tighter, trying to make yourself ignore all the sounds. If you are unlucky, someone's turnip lantern still glows faintly in the corner, casting monstrous wobbly shadows that seem determined to crawl straight up the walls. The post-Halloween jitters are intense. Every small sound, a groan from the rafters, a scuttle in the eaves, the soft breathing of your sister could be a mouse, a ghost, or a particularly active cabbage. You want desperately to fall asleep, but your mind is racing with the night's images. Stories of spooky attics bobbing for apples, the daring of the midnight fortune teller. Did you truly see something in the mirror? Was that sudden chill just the draft? Or was it the ghost of Cousin Thomas returning to find his lost sock? Still, the excitement slowly wanes. Your eyes grow heavy. The exhaustion from the long night finally wins, and the strange, nervous magic of Halloween gives way to the slow, rising tide of sleep. The last sound you hear before finally drifting off might be the gentle murmur of your parents talking downstairs, or the family dog snorting as it settles near the hearth. Maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of romance, adventure, or a world where the cabbages stay outside and the bed is always warm. And so, in the creaking, cold darkness of a Victorian bedroom, you find yourself surrounded by family, comforted by the recent memories of shared laughter, a full belly of strange snacks, and the absolute knowledge that even if the ghosts are real, they are certainly not as scary as a sibling with cold feet. Halloween finishes not with a fright or a scream, but with the deep, tranquil sleep of a child who knows they have survived the silliest and spookiest night of the year. When the morning light finally arrives on November 1st, it is not with the soft light of a new beginning, but with a chorus of groans, sneezes, scrapes, and the unmistakable noise of a parent stepping directly into something suspicious and damp. The morning after Victorian Halloween is less about peaceful reflection and more about figuring out what was lost, what survived, and how many cabbages now occupy spaces cabbages were never intended to be. The household wakes up slowly, and no one is eager to leave the warm comfort of their bed. Sleep was disturbed, full of restless dreams about mysterious shadows and turnip lanterns. You feel groggy, stiff, and you are still wearing a faint streak of soot across your brow from the night's costume. Eventually, though, curiosity and hunger pull you out. The hallway is cold and strangely quiet, broken only by the distant clatter of someone clearing away broken dishes. Your first real look at the aftermath is in the parlour. Every surface tells a piece of the story. The fireplace is choked with ashes and the few leftover roasted chestnuts. The last remains of the treacle toffee are stuck stubbornly to the side of the table, and someone's parkin has been flattened underfoot, most likely in the middle of a late-night chase after a ghost. There is a strange, mysterious puddle next to the window. You truly hope it's only water. You are not going to ask anyone. It does not take long to realise that the house is not the only casualty. The outside world is a hilarious carnival of chaos. The front steps are covered with the debris of Halloween, a crushed apple, cabbage leaves, the faint shape of a flower handprint, and, inexplicably, the family cat wearing a turnip lantern like a helmet. Across the yard, the clothesline has been restrung with someone's knickers and socks. No one is sure who they belong to, and no one wants to claim them. The older children are sent out to investigate the wider neighbourhood. The reports come back in like battlefield news. The Smiths next door have a cabbage in every single flower pot. Old Mrs. Higginbotham is in a terrible mood about footprints all over her prized pumpkins. A group of the younger children insists they saw a real ghost in the outhouse, though it was likely just the neighbour's nightgown blowing in the wind. The local officer surveys the entire scene with a weary sigh, logging another year of unfortunate, mysterious incidents for his ledger. Breakfast is a much more subdued occasion. Gone is the excitement of sticky sweets and soul cakes. In their place is a round of bread and tea, eaten in the resigned silence of people recovering from both chaos and sugar. Parents grumble as they attempt to scrub the remnants of treacle off the good tablecloth and try to coax the family dog out from under the heavy sofa. Children exchange stories of close calls, near misses with flying turnips, the successful escape from Mrs. Puddlewick's bucket of water, or the bold cousin who survived the séance with his dignity mostly intact. There is a strange satisfaction in the mess. The morning after Halloween is a true badge of honour, a clear sign that for one wild night, mischief was successful, pranks were perfectly executed, and the bonds of the neighbourhood and family were tested and somehow made stronger. Even the grown-ups, sweeping up fireplace residue and pulling forgotten vegetables from the downspouts, can't help but grin. They recall their own lively evenings, their childhood cabbage raids, and the pleasure of waking up to the messy evidence. Soon enough, the house will settle back into its ordinary routine. The rooms are straightened, the clothes are washed, and the final specks of charred wood and candy are cleaned away. But for one brief, wild morning, they all share in the mutual weariness and quiet sense of accomplishment for surviving another Halloween. By noon on November 1st, the enchanted feeling of the previous night has completely dissipated, replaced by the slow thud of regular life resuming. The air in the house, still thick with the smell of sweet treats and smoke, is noticeably subdued. The mess from the night before is apparent in surprising spots. A sticky door handle here, a drooping cabbage leaf there. But everyone is now too drained to fight any further battles. It's time to pay the price for a night of uncontrolled, joyful mischief. Children wander into the day, looking like veterans of a messy, long campaign. Costumes are nowhere to be seen. Instead, they're wrapped in the nearest blanket, hair messy and movements slow. Their bodies feel heavy from too much sugar, not enough sleep, and a whole lot of running from imaginary terrors. Siblings who were prank partners and rivals the previous night now share a quiet truce. As they gather at the kitchen table, eyes half closed and speaking in soft voices, breakfast is a calm affair. The soul cakes and the hope of more sweets are gone. In their place are thick slices of toast, cool tea, and the gentle sound of chairs shifting. The parents talk quietly, assessing the damage. Who is responsible for the cabbage cleanup? Has anyone located the family cat? What happened to the nice candlesticks? The laughter is softer now, but just as real, and even the strictest father struggles to hide a smile, remembering the spectacle of the previous night. As the chores begin, everyone moves a little sluggishly. The kids are sent outside to gather stray decorations, untangle clothes from unlikely places, and wipe the last traces of wet windows and chalk messages from garden fences. You complain about how unfair it all is, but secretly you enjoy the ritual. The chance to exchange tales, relive the best stunts, and find out who dropped the cabbage in Mrs. Featherstone's boots. There's a sense of shared purpose in the clean-up, as if the whole neighbourhood quietly agrees that the unspoken agreement of Halloween mayhem is short-lived, but the memories will last. The adults, even as they fuss, find themselves sharing stories of their own childhood escapades, admitting under their breath that they once traded the vicar's hat for a gourd or started the first cabbage wars decades ago. Tradition is stubborn, and Halloween, for all its pandemonium, is one of the few nights where rules are flexible, stories are born, and even the most irritable grown-ups remember what it's like to be a little reckless. By the time afternoon arrives, the outside world seems almost back to normal. The last turnip lantern has gone dark, the bonfire is now just a charred circle on the lawn, and the family cat, finally free from its vegetable headgear, goes back to its job of ignoring everyone in favour of sleeping by the fire. School books are opened, chores are finished, and the conversation moves from pranks to lessons, from tricks to the regular realities of life in Victorian England. But a feeling remains, a quiet satisfaction that you were part of something wild and out of the ordinary. For one night you ignored the rules, faced the darkness, and made memories sticky enough to last the entire year. And even as the adults sweep up the final bits of debris and the children return to their daily lives, there's already talk of plans for next Halloween. Who will find the best cabbage? Who will attempt the most daring stunt? The countdown has already begun. And so, with a final look at the backyard, which is still not completely cabbage-free, you return to life, your heart lighter for having survived the turmoil and your mind already planning next year's mischief. Halloween is finished. Life moves on. But the story will be told again and again every time someone finds a turnip seed in their shoe. In the charming haze of Halloween night, it's easy to forget one of the most persistent, least charming realities of a Victorian childhood, the ongoing war against the itch. No matter how exciting the pranks, how sweet the candy, or how frightening the ghost stories, beneath it all is a constant adversary, head lice. And if that weren't enough, everything you wear is made of wool so harsh it could be used to scour pots. Let's be honest, by October you and your siblings are already experts in the autumn itch. The arrival of colder weather means adding more layers. And in Victorian England, layering up means wool, thick socks, bulky sweaters, undershirts, scarves. Every piece of clothing seems designed to trap both warmth and every small critter in the area. There's no central heating, no synthetic fabrics, and absolutely no way out. Halloween only makes it worse. After an evening spent running across damp fields, squeezing into crowded living rooms, and wrestling in the dark with siblings over the last piece of treacle toffee, everyone's sweaters feel twice as scratchy and suspiciously like they're moving. Costumes thrown together from the family's old fabric pile don't help, especially when one person's witch cape is actually an old horse blanket or a hand-me-down that has survived years of infestations. It's hard to look scary when you're scratching behind your ear every few seconds, or when your ghost sheet leaves you itching in places you didn't even know existed. There's also the constant worry. One sibling scratching means a family-wide check is coming. Mother announces a knit night, and everyone is lined up, scalp by scalp, under the harsh light of the kitchen lamp. Out comes the terrifying comb, an instrument so fine-toothed and unyielding it might as well be called the Victorian Inquisition. Oil or vinegar is rubbed onto hair and scalps, followed by a round of combing that feels only slightly less painful than public shaming. The unlucky ones are isolated in a specific chair, sometimes with a cloth tied dramatically around their head, as if they've just recovered from a plague. Wool, meanwhile, is a tormentor to everyone. You itch when you put it on, you itch when you sweat through it while dunking for apples, and you itch even more when you pull it off, only to find a rash that looks strangely like a map of the British Empire. Halloween night is a parade of children vigorously scratching beneath layers of scarves, hats, and quickly assembled costumes. Ghosts don't scare you. Dry, irritated skin and strange red welts do. Sometimes misery enjoys company. You trade horror stories with friends who had the worst case, who found the biggest louse, who only got away with a slight rash. Some families rely on home remedies, a rub of camphor, a vinegar rinse, or just enduring it. Meanwhile, the family dog gets a thorough inspection, as if the poor animal is the origin of all evil, and the cat sensibly vanishes until the commotion is over. Yet, in the grand narrative of Victorian Halloween, the itch is more than a minor annoyance. It's a necessary experience. If you emerge from the night with only a few new bites and a manageable rash, you consider yourself fortunate. You wear your woolen welts and scratchy scars with a certain pride, knowing that true bravery isn't facing ghosts or mischief, but surviving Halloween in Victorian underclothes. So as you lie in bed, the memory of laughter and ghost stories fading, your final Halloween companion is the gentle, ongoing itch. You scratch, sigh, and pull your blanket closer, knowing that in the Victorian world, the itch is just as much a part of the story as any flying cabbage or eerie lantern. With Halloween turmoil at its peak and bonfire smoke still swirling in the air, there's only one thing left for a group of Victorian children set on prolonging the night: a legendary game of hide and seek. But this isn't the controlled version played in a bright room. This is hide and seek Victorian style, where the rules are as unclear as the weather, and the London fog is thick enough to swallow you whole. The perfect setting for this game is the street itself. Fog rolls between the gas lamps, doorways are dimly lit, and the faint sound of laughter and receding footsteps echoes off the brick walls. Every shrub, barrel, and narrow passage becomes a potential hiding place, and the line between reality and ghost story blurs in the dim, shaky light. The seeker is chosen, often the youngest or the one who lost at apple snapping, and stands in the middle of the cobblestones, counting loudly, hands clamped over their eyes, as the world disappears into the grey mist. You and your friends scatter, your hearts pounding as the count rises. The excitement of the chase is intensified by the bizarre atmosphere. The fog turns the ordinary into the strange. A laundry line is suddenly a haunted gallows. A pile of discarded boxes looks like a witch's lair, and every shadow seems to move and change shape. The only sounds are the squish of boots and the stifled giggles of those not yet found. Hiding is half the pleasure, half a battle against your own fear. Some kids cram into the tightest spots, behind the coal pile, under a wooden cart, or inside a neighbour's shed that smells distinctly of onions and secrets. Others choose daring, exposed spots, behind the vicar's statue, crouched in the hedge or pressed flat against a cold, damp wall, holding their breath, hoping no one hears the frantic beating of their heart. The fog is both a friend and a threat. It hides you from the seeker, but it hides the seeker from you too. Every approaching sound sends a rush of excitement and fear up your back. Maybe it's your best friend, maybe it's the seeker, or maybe it's just old Mrs. Pringle muttering about troublemakers from the depths of the mist. Nobody really knows. Meanwhile, the seeker stumbles, shouting out names, arms stretched wide, shuffling carefully so as not to slip on the slick cobblestones. The rule is to touch anyone you find, and their loud yell signals victory. But sometimes the seeker gets scared by a swinging lantern or a cat darting across the path, causing an accidental diversion and a nervous chuckle. Each round finishes with a triumphant gathering of found children, faces flushed and damp, and at least one person who manages to vanish so completely they have to be coaxed back with a bribe of leftover gingerbread. Hide and seek in the fog is more than just a game. It's a test of nerve and imagination, a way to squeeze every last bit of fun from Halloween night. The city becomes a lively, twisting maze where every hiding spot feels like a secret, every corner a new thrill. And in those moments of waiting, breathless, mostly hidden with the fog swirling around you, you truly understand why Victorian ghost stories start with a child in the mist. Eventually, the game is called off. As the fog gets heavier, or parents call you in, threatening early bedtimes or extra chores, you emerge from the shadows. Victorious or caught, muddy and smiling, your heart still racing, the great Victorian hide and seek is over for another year. But the memory stays, part adventure, part legend, forever shrouded in the mysteries of Halloween night. Every Victorian Halloween has its share of ghost stories and pranks. But nothing adds more excitement to the night than a proper round of sibling rivalry. In a world of shared bedrooms, identical woolen socks, and family treasures that become costume pieces, competition among brothers and sisters is practically the main event. Forget the neighbours. Your real opponents are living right under the same roof. It begins before the first soul cake is served. Someone hides your mask, claiming the wind carried it away. Your favourite scarf, saved for your pirate costume, is suddenly wrapped around the family cat, who looks less like a scary beast and more like he's planning his own revenge. You strike back by putting a cold boiled potato in your sister's boot, an aggressive move in the chilly month of October. Once the celebrations start, every activity turns into an opportunity for sabotage. During apple bobbing, an older brother might accidentally bump the tub just as you lean in for a bite, guaranteeing a face full of water. When it's time for the fortune-telling games, siblings shove to shout out embarrassing predictions. You'll marry the baker's son and have 10 children, causing shrieks, giggles, and the kind of embarrassed anger only family can inspire. Going trick-or-treating together is a tricky operation. The oldest always claims the largest lantern or the best spot at the front door, leaving the youngest to follow behind and beg for leftovers. When you finally get a rare treat, an extra piece of gingerbread or a hard-won roasted chestnut, you guard it fiercely because sharing is an idea more often talked about than done. Costume making is a messy battlefield. Someone's cape is mysteriously missing an armhole. A witch's hat shows up with the point flattened and held by a clothespin. Your attempt at a vampire cloak is intercepted and turned into an emergency ghost sheet by your little brother, who insists that ghosts are scarier anyway. Quiet threats, stolen pins, and last-minute sewing failures are all part of the fun. If you want your costume to survive the night, you'd better keep it on, or sleep, with one eye open. The worst offences are reserved for the ghost hunt and bedtime. Nothing says "I love you" like slipping a cold cabbage into a sibling's blanket or waiting until the candles are out to whisper, "Did you hear that noise in the attic?" Some take it even further, subtly tying the ends of bedsheets together or hiding a turnip lantern under the bed for a delayed midnight scare. Laughter echoes through the house, broken up by shouts, scolding, and the inevitable parental threat of no dessert for a week if you don't quiet down. But even in the heat of the competition, there's an underlying connection to it all. Sibling rivalry is both a weapon and a defense. When an outsider tries to outprank the family, the rivals instantly become partners, joining forces to protect the home, the candy stash, and family honor. If someone outside the house dares to tease your little sister or steal your brother's lantern, you band together, forgetting all complaints, at least until the outsider is gone. As the night winds down and the last prank is played, you find yourself sharing a blanket, swapping stories, and dividing the leftover sweets under the covers. For all the tricks and small betrayals, you wouldn't trade your mischievous siblings for all the gingerbread. In England, family arguments may last a day, but the stories of Halloween night will be retold, exaggerated, and laughed over for a lifetime. As the sun finally comes up after Halloween night, the mess from the previous evening's turmoil becomes completely, hilariously clear. For one particular Victorian family, the yearly ritual of cabbage night takes a surprising turn. Not because of the vegetables thrown at neighbours' doors, but because the entire family cabbage cart has disappeared in the cold, pale light of morning. It's not just your dignity you're looking for, it's the wooden cart your father swore was totally safe behind the shed. The first person to notice is usually the one assigned the task of getting a fresh cabbage for breakfast. Their confused yelling wakes up the household, and soon the kitchen window is crowded with sleepy heads looking into the yard. Where there was once a reliable cart stacked with bruised leftover vegetables, there is now only a set of muddy wheel tracks leading off into the unknown. The family's own cat sits on the fence, its gaze sweeping over the whole affair with a look of pure judgment, almost audible in its silent message. I knew this mess was coming. The first impulse, naturally, is to accuse the usual suspects. Fingers start flying between the siblings. Could it be the eldest, who just last year tried to turn the family cart into a homemade sled and nearly drowned in the town pond? Or maybe the twins, who are famous for hiding any loose object, especially if it's large enough to serve as a secret hideout? The family dog gets a brief questioning, a hopeful sniff of leftover cabbage, but is quickly cleared of suspicion after rolling over to resume its nap. The mystery, however, rapidly deepens. Curious stories begin to emerge from the neighbouring yards. The Smiths reported finding just one cabbage tucked away inside their coal bucket. Over at the Higginbothams, they woke up to their garden gnome placed precariously on a cartwheel, its arms loaded down with carved turnip lanterns. Even old Mrs. Peabody, who takes pride in never being fooled, discovered her enormous prize marrows lined up neatly by the rain barrel. Wearing what looked like a suspiciously smug expression, the rumours explode into a full-scale community-wide hunt. The children transform into junior detectives, carefully tracing muddy footprints and fitting the pieces together with the gravity of a Scotland Yard operation, though with much more giggling and fewer actual magnifying glasses. Suspects are called in for questioning. Did anyone happen to see shadowy figures moving through the fog late last night? Was that actually their cousin George sneaking past the outhouse, or just an unusually plump raccoon? As the search expands, the theories multiply. Some whisper the cabbage cart was snatched by a rival family looking to settle a score from last year's annual flower competition. Others suggest it was the work of mischievous spirits, angered by a particularly bad ghost story told at midnight. The adults, caught between being annoyed and secretly amused, remind everyone that they still haven't found the second-best rake since last year's wheelbarrow incident. Finally, the cart is located in the last place anyone would look, parked right in front of the village church, completely decked out in bunting and absolutely overflowing with cabbages, turnips, and a truly impressive amount of mud. A note is stuck to it, written in shaky handwriting, proclaiming the cart the champion of the Grand Halloween Vegetable Derby. The townspeople gather, sharing a laugh and agreeing that the standard for next year's prank war has just been significantly raised. By noon, the cart is wheeled home, looking a little battered, but its status as a legend cemented. The tale of the missing cabbage cart instantly becomes a favourite family story, retold with increasing dramatic flair as the years go by. In Victorian England, the quality of a Halloween is not judged by how little is lost, but by how truly epic the effort to retrieve it turns out to be. As the cabbages are finally returned to their proper humble home, everyone agrees that this mystery, like all the best Halloween stories, will last far longer than the clean-up. As the sun sets and the evening quiet returns, the final Halloween tradition unfolds. A family debriefing that is part confession, part stand-up comedy, and completely essential for life to return to normal. It usually starts with a nervous laugh or a quick, guilty sideways look. Someone cracks first, admitting, "I was the one who put cold porridge in the boots." Or "that cabbage in Mrs. Puddlewick's mailbox. My bad." This opens the floodgates. Both children and adults take turns sharing their deeds, especially the pranks they manage to pull off without getting caught. It's a rare moment of total honesty, protected by the unspoken code that whatever is confessed after Halloween stays right here in the parlour. The mood is light, but every admission is met with a round of playful groans or dramatic gasps. The older siblings roll their eyes at the clumsy attempts at sabotage from the younger ones. Parents pretend to scold, though their eyes are undeniably twinkling with amusement. Occasionally, a particularly bold confession, a secret turnip trade, or a daring solo rescue of the missing cabbage cart earns a round of applause or a full dramatic reenactment, with everyone joining in to relive the silliest and most memorable moments. Yet, beneath the laughter, there is a small twinge of regret. Maybe a prank was pushed too far, like soaking a sister's socks one too many times, or leaving a turnip lantern burning too long in the window. Perhaps someone's feelings were accidentally hurt in the scramble for the last slice of parkin cake, or the realization hits that a soul cake was forgotten for the neighbour who always shares his apples. These confessions serve as a gentle, useful lesson in where fun should end and basic kindness needs to begin. Then come the silent judgments. The family cat watches from the corner, tail twitching, eyes narrowed, as if keeping a meticulous tally of every single prank and act of mischief. Adults exchange knowing glances about which child will have to deal with the worst chores tomorrow. Even the normally cheerful dog seems to shoot a side-eye to anyone who confesses to hiding sausages under his bed. But these silent judgments are brief and quickly forgiven. What truly matters is the feeling of being together, the shared understanding that for one night everyone contributed to the great messy story of Halloween. Rivalries disappear, replaced by new inside jokes and small tales of minor triumphs. A simple spilled bowl of nuts becomes a legendary catastrophe. The search for the missing cabbage cart is now a heroic, grand epic. Even the little letdowns, like missing a favourite treat or getting scared by a sibling's trick, are softened in the warm glow of shared laughter. As the fire dims and eyelids grow heavy, the last round of confessions finally peters out. Someone mumbles a sleepy promise to do better next year. Someone else is already busy plotting a brand new trick. The evening ends not with punishment, but with a powerful feeling of forgiveness and family unity. Each person is grateful in their own way to belong to such a strange, troublemaking and profoundly loving household. Victorian Halloween is about more than fear, tricks or treats. It's a lesson in the art of coming together, speaking the truth, laughing at your own mistakes, and learning when to simply say, sorry. And as the room falls silent and the family cat finally settles into the warmest lap, the realization dawns that the best stories aren't about pranks at all. They are about building memories, accepting small failures, and most importantly, being part of something worth coming home to. So as the embers turn to ash and the final turnip lantern flickers and dies, let's take a moment to appreciate how far we've come, and just how much those Victorian kids endured for a bit of fun. A couple of pranks and a pocketful of soot, Halloween night in the 19th century was more than just a holiday. It was a sprawling, muddy, absurd endurance test for children whose imaginations were as big as their need for causing mayhem. You survived the cabbage attacks, the fog-shrouded games of hide-and-seek, and enough family tricks to guarantee employment for a century's worth of therapists. You bobbed for apples in water that was definitely unfiltered, braved fortune-telling rituals involving onion peel, and faced down both ghosts, real and imagined, alongside the persistent threat of itchy wool underpants. Through all of it, You held tight to your turnip lantern and your sense of humour, which was honestly your best defence against the cold and the chaos. It's easy to laugh at the weirdness of Victorian Halloween. Now, lying back in a clean bed, tucked into soft pyjamas, with nothing scarier than a dead phone battery or a neighbour's dog barking at the air. But history is truly just a collection of people muddling through, praying their pranks work, and their vegetables don't fly back at them. So tonight, as you get comfortable beneath a mountain of modern comforts, indoor plumbing, central heating, and snacks that didn't come from the bottom of a coal bucket, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to those scrappy Victorian kids. They braved lice, the frost, and the world's least appetizing apples so that we could one day eat fun-sized chocolate bars and argue about the quality of store-bought costumes. Because the past might be a little rough, a little ridiculous, and occasionally haunted by questionable food, but it is also a reminder that people will always find a way to laugh, to play, and to turn even the chilliest nights into memories worth keeping. Now close your eyes, let the quiet settle, and drift off, knowing that the most frightening thing you'll encounter tonight is maybe a creaky floorboard or a restless pet. Sleep well, and dream of a world where your biggest problem is just dodging a flying cabbage. Good night.